Oregon's got a very real path to the national championship this year.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. I'll react to episode 2 of That Team Out West. Just got done watching it before hitting record, and I love this stuff. I am all about it. And do the Ducks develop well? Yeah, we'll talk about that notion a little bit later on today's show. But been thinking about the national championship because one of you sent me a question about it. And of course, I hear it in the national media all the time that Oregon has a chance, that Oregon can be a national title contender this year. And it's absolutely true. And I think it's rooted in the path that they have being multifaceted. In past years, in the 12-team playoff, which generally speaking, I'm not a fan of. Does it help Oregon? Yes, absolutely. It helps a lot of teams. I mean, it might have gotten Georgia a national championship last year. We'll never know because that's the way the rules were written. But when you look at Oregon's schedule this year, they're now up to a minus 300 favorite on FanDuel to make the college football playoff. So if you just get in, you're going to have a chance. But when you look at the national landscape of college football, if I had a preseason top 25, Georgia would be my number 1 team. Oregon could be number 2. Oregon could be number 4. I don't think they would be number 5 because the consensus 5th team to a lot of people is Alabama. Ole Miss can be in that conversation as well. I think Ole Miss might have the better roster top to bottom, but Alabama, I think, has the better head coach. Though I think Lane Kiffin's good, I know that Kalen DeBoer is great. So when you look at where Oregon fits into those in that echelon of college football and that discussion, they're worthy of being there. But the schedule gives them a number of different ways to achieve that goal. So, for instance, the reason that I lay this out, take Florida State. I don't think Florida State's a national title contender. They think they're a national title contender. Okay. They have one way. They might have two. They might have two ways to get into the college football playoff. But it is not as easy if you're in the ACC or if you're in the Big 12 to find your way into the playoff if you don't get the auto bid in the conference championship game. Florida State can only lose one game in the regular season and get into the playoff without a conference championship. If they're 11-2, they're probably in. Probably. But if they're 10-2 and they're not in the conference championship game and they're in the ACC, I don't know that that's there. The good thing for Oregon, being in the Big Ten with the schedule they have, I think in all likelihood 10-2 gets them there. But certainly 11-1, whether or not they win the Big Ten championship game, guarantees that they are going to make the college football playoff. There is no way an 11-2 Big Ten championship game loser would be left out of a 12-team playoff because there are 5 auto bids, 4 to the highest ranked conference champions, which I think is ridiculous, 1 to the highest ranked group of 5 champion, which I also think is ridiculous, and then there's 7 at-large spots. I don't know of a year in which the loser of Ohio State, Michigan, essentially the last 3 years, who when they've been 11-0 going into the game, loses that game and then ends up being, essentially the Big Ten championship runner-up, ends up being outside the top 12. I think that's a pretty solid guarantee. So getting into that mix is the first step. Do you have a path to make the playoff? Yes, Oregon has that. Then step 2, can you contend with the rest of the top teams in college football? Again, that answer on paper appears to be yes. Well, we know more as Oregon really plays Ohio State in their 5th. I know it's the 6th game. I think it's week 6, week 7, whatever, October 12th. On October 12th, Oregon will get a big, fat measuring stick. And if they beat Ohio State at home, they will catapult themselves even more firmly into the national title conversation. But the playoff path can be there in more ways than one. Because let's say Oregon goes 11-1, makes the Big Ten championship game, and loses to Ohio State, and they're sitting there at 11-2. If they're an at-large team, in all likelihood, they're getting a home playoff game. And I don't think there would be a team that can go into Autzen Stadium, even in the 12-team playoff. I mean, if Oregon is the 5th seed in that scenario or the 6th seed, they could be going up against the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champion. Well, they did that last year. How'd it go? I think the results would be pretty similar. Now, it depends on which Group of 5 team comes out of that particular mix. But Oregon's chances to get out of the first round, really good. And when I look at the rest of the rosters in college football, Georgia is the only one, and Georgia is really, really good. They are not as good as they were 2 years ago per se, and Oregon's much better than they were last time those two programs matched up, and it went ugly for the Ducks. It was not a great day. That's not what would happen if Oregon played Georgia today. Would the Bulldogs be favored? Yeah, the Bulldogs would be favored over literally anybody in college football. But then the number 2 team, I think going into a year, I heard Joel Klatt talking about this on his show with Dan Lanning from the end of July, that, in past seasons, you've seen a top team going into the season and the next team who you expect to play in the national championship game. You don't have that this year. It's a whole cornucopia of college football teams that could get into the mix. And Oregon's right there. This is what happens when you recruit, when you portal, when you retain players, get key returners, have Dan Lanning as the head coach and all the promise that he's shown, and the steps that I think Oregon fans hope and expect him to continue to make as a head coach going forward. The path to a national championship is indeed very clear. You're going to have sufficiently high level of quarterback play. Sorry, my brain's kind of mush today, to be quite honest. But you're going to have good enough quarterback play. Your offensive line is expected to be one of the 10 best in college football. The defensive line, as I talked about yesterday, is the best that Oregon has had since they last went to the national championship. You have got NFL caliber and all-conference caliber guys at every position group on defense and on offense, quite frankly. It's a real shot. It is a legitimate real shot. This is not a hype shot. This is not a made-up shot. The path is there. The rest of the college football landscape has got a really good team that should be the preseason favorites in Georgia. But I don't expect Georgia to just run away with a national championship. I don't expect Georgia to just dominate anybody and everybody that they play to an extent. Like, if you ask me who my preseason champion is, yes, probably Georgia. But has Oregon closed that gap? Yes. And is there a gap between Oregon and the top 2 or 3 teams and they're just trying to be think back to 2019. That team was one play away against Arizona State on 3rd and 16 from getting to the college football playoff. Guess what? That 2019 team, they won a Rose Bowl. Great. Awesome year. Pac-12 champions. Great season. They were not close to the teams at the top of college football. And that's the point that I'm trying to drive home here. The schedule works out, the playoff structure, and the roster that Oregon has. It's a legitimate chance to go win the national championship. Can't guarantee that's going to happen. Can't guarantee Oregon will win their first playoff game, whoever they match up with. But what you can guarantee is that this offseason, Dan Lanning and company have done everything that they have done to give themselves a legitimate chance. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. I saw episode 2 over there on Twitter of That Team Out West. I have many thoughts. Stick around for that. First, let's talk about Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices that are on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which is better for all of you. They've got killer last-minute deals. They've got all-in prices, views from your seat, their lowest price guarantee. Game Time just takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc., whatever you are looking for. You get a panoramic view of your seat before you arrive, so you know exactly what to expect when you get to the arena, event, location, wherever you're going. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Before I get to the reaction to That Team Out West, I got a question from the subtext community. You can always be a part of it. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter. at S. McLaughlin CFB or at Locked On Ducks. You can also become a Locked On Ducks insider. That link is in the description below. Get priority access and all sorts of other perks. The question was, what would it mean for Oregon to win a national championship? Well, you would vanquish a lot of demons for fans. I don't know that I can give this response in less than 30 minutes. I'm going to try to do it in less than 60 seconds. You can vanquish a lot of demons for fans. You can silence all the critics about Oregon. You can amplify some of the critics who will say, Oregon just bought a national championship, because nobody else has ever invested money into players for a national championship caliber season. Like Dan Lanning said, Georgia, #1 recruiting class. Amazing they did it without any NIL whatsoever. But I think more than anything, the old school generation of fans that have been around Oregon for decades, who remember when 6-6 was a good year, when 3 or 4 wins was a standard before Rich Brooks turned things around and Bellotti built something else. And the people that have watched it over decades and decades, people like my dad and guys even older than him, I think that's who it would mean the most to say, you know what? All the frustration, Dyer not being called down, the 2014 Ohio State game, and all that sort of stuff, it'll all have been worth it. That's what it would mean. Most of all, if Oregon wins the national championship. So I watched the next episode of that team out west, and Scott Anderson, man, that guy's good. that guy is really, really good. So the second episode was all about physicality. This is not an accident. Nothing that Oregon does on social media or in the media landscape is by accident. And the reason I say that is there's a question, there's a generalized narrative, and Joel Klatt was talking about it in this particular episode, about can Oregon match up to the physicality? Can they adapt to the style of play? Can they adapt to the Big Ten? Because they've been playing in the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 is soft, and that's just, all this yada, 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 all that sort of stuff. So I don't think it's an accident that they were focused on physicality. Couple of takeaways. Number one, I fully expect Oregon's offensive and defensive lines to hold up on a weekly basis in the Big Ten. I don't say that because I watched this video. I say that because those are the sorts of players that Oregon has brought into the program. And I think highlighting that for fans that maybe have tuned out a lot during the summer, which I think is the best part of all of this, is to excite the fans who say, all right, college football ended 6 months ago with, when the transfer portal was not even open yet. And I watched the spring game, but I haven't really tuned in since then. I think this is who that Team Out West videos are mostly for. They're not videos, they're mini movies. I mean, these are over 30 minutes long, many, many hours of getting film and editing, production, and all that sort of stuff. But I think that they're incredibly well put together, really fun to watch. I love the behind-the-scenes access. And Wilson Love, Oregon's strength and conditioning coach, I think that's who he is. Because a lot of strength and conditioning coaches are like that. They're weird, but in like a fun, playful, exciting, goofy sort of way. And what I'm enjoying most about these episodes are the way that you get to see what meeting rooms are actually like. And for anyone whose instinct would be, well, they know the cameras aren't, or the room's really like that. I haven't been in those Oregon rooms before, though we kind of are being taken behind the scenes. But I've been in other football locker rooms, team meetings, interactions that are, not on camera generally. That's what they're like. That is what they are genuinely like. There is no, play it up for the cameras and make it do. No, this is just what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. And I think that's fantastic. So I'm loving these episodes. I can't wait for the next one. I think it's a great way to build the anticipation for the season. And I hope they do this every year. Just like I hope they continue to do the cinematic recaps. Ducks versus them that they did after every win last season. Like I thought those were outstanding. And I think they're just more than anything, people can say, well, they're just trying to get attention, trying to do this. I think it's just a great thing for Oregon fans to watch and further the connection with the team. Because when you see behind the scenes stuff and you see the way these guys act with one another, the coaches, the players, and how they talk to each other and what it's like to be in a meeting and all that sort of stuff, the overwhelming majority of fans never get to see that. And kudos to Dan Lanning for allowing this to be, he's not a big media guy. I think we can establish that pretty clearly at this point. Post-practice in particular, he's pretty short with his answers. He wants to just get in. I have to do is get out and whatnot. Like he's not a guy who likes to stand up there and give a bunch of sermons and talk a whole bunch. Like he just wants to get to work. And I think this doesn't interfere with him doing that sort of work. And that's why he's allowing it. But I think it's just such a cool thing for fans to be able to see what's it like to be at practice. What's it like to be in a team meeting? How do you go from here to there? I saw the photo of them climbing Spencer's Butte again and honoring Spencer Webb and Kyrie Jackson. But what's it like to be up there? What does it feel like to hear Lanning talk about two former players who he obviously loved and was so excited to see go on in their careers, and to have that taken away in tragic fashion? Like, what's it like to see the head coach talk about that when you're up in that particular moment? I think all that access is just so cool for fans, and why I'm really glad that they're doing it, and I hope that that they continue. In a football sense, Kyler Casper made a sweet catch from Dante Moore. Just file those names if you're not an everydayer out there. File that connection away in your memory bank for 2025. Just think about it. Dante Moore, Kyler Casper, touchdown. Just think about it. Just think about it. And my everydayers out there, you know why I'm telling other people to think about it. So I thought it was great. Like, I thought the episode, the way that they're defining the themes and playing that throughout the course of the episode is really cool. The interviews that the players are doing, the personalities, like, I think it's great. If you haven't checked these out, they're on Twitter, they're on YouTube. Just look them up. Easy to find. There are 2 episodes out now. There will be 2 more released because we're that close to the Oregon football season going into the year, and I can't wait to watch them. I can't wait to watch them. My excitement mounts every time that I see them. Back into the mailbag here to wrap up this particular segment. Still plenty more coming on the show. You need not worry. This from Blazer Duck, a regular listener. Spencer, do you see a scenario where Boise State is ranked week 2 to play Oregon? With Oregon's schedule and being in the Big Ten, does it even matter if Boise State is ranked when we play them? Thanks. Answer, no, it does not. It does not matter. First of all, Boise State, not a preseason top 25 team, will not be ranked in the top 10 by the time they play Oregon because they only have 1 game, and I forget who their opponent is. Let me double check that real quick just so that they play at Georgia Southern. That game is not going to catapult them into the top 25. But for Oregon, that doesn't matter. All the Ducks are trying to accomplish in the first 5 weeks of the season, don't have any scares, right? Avoid a big shocking upset, because I would be shocked if they lose any of those 5 football games against Idaho, Boise State, Oregon State, UCLA, Michigan State. They should go 5-0. They should win every game by 10 or more points, usually more, if we're being honest. Boise State's probably the toughest of those 5 games. But does it matter if they're ranked? Not a ton, because Boise State, they're not at a place right now. It's not what they were in their heyday. They're still, a top tier program in the Mountain West. They're the reigning conference champions, and they're the favorites. So they're a heavy favorite in the Mountain West going into this season. By the end of the year, yeah, it could bolster Oregon's resume a little. It's not going to make a huge impact. If Oregon's 11-1, the Boise State game doesn't matter. If Oregon's 10-2, and let's say they lose to Ohio State and Wisconsin, but they beat Michigan, that Boise State game, it could have a minimal impact on how the committee views them and whether they should be, a playoff team, and what it does for their strength of schedule if the Broncos have stacked up wins and they're, 10-2 or 11-1 in the regular season and their only losses to Oregon. Yeah, maybe it could help a little. I don't think it's going to do a lot. Shouldn't matter whether or not they're ranked in week 2, because then they won't be ranked the following week after Oregon beats them at Autzen. So I think that Boise State game I talked about a little bit on yesterday's show. I think it's the toughest of the first 5 games. I think Oregon finally gets that monkey off their back and beats Boise State. Ignorance is bliss for Dan Lanning when it comes to that matchup. But at home, yeah, Oregon should be absolutely fine. There's another question that came in about a criticism of Oregon. I don't know how widespread it is, but it's an interesting question to raise. Anyway, we'll talk about that next. So I got a mailbag question from Sean, which made me think about something else, because I think this is a popular notion that you could see from certain fans in the Twitter sphere. I don't know that big time media personalities or people that cover Washington actually share this opinion, but worthy of discussion. This from Sean. Hey Spence, this may be a good topic for you to cover. A lot of Husky fans are saying that Duck coaches don't develop talent. This is laughable. They only recruit well, but fall short of NFL potential. This seems like something we can actually refute. What say you? Anyone who makes the claim, and I assume it's usually just people being loud on Twitter, that Oregon doesn't develop talent, I don't know what metric you're using. What is the data point you are looking at to say Oregon doesn't put enough talent in the NFL, or they don't develop guys like this? Because even if you look at Oregon's highest rated recruits ever, Dan Lanning talks about this. Like, if you recruit guys, that's great, but if you don't develop them, then it doesn't actually do you any good. Here are Oregon's highest rated recruits ever. And keep in mind, if you went to any school, including Alabama or anywhere else, you can go through 5-star recruits or highly rated 4-stars that don't end up panning out in the NFL, or that don't end up, having the sorts of pro careers that they're capable of. But, for Oregon, I'll keep it in the modern era. Kayvon Thibodeau, I think that's going pretty well. Justin Flo, hampered by injuries. Noah Sewell, I had to skip over Haloti Ngata and Jonathan Stewart because, again, keeping it in the modern era, but those guys were really good. Noah Sewell, he got drafted by the Bears. DeAnthony Thomas, I don't know if that's modern enough for this conversation. Josh Connerly is going to get drafted after this year. Eric Armstead, Thomas Tyner, again, injuries were a problem. And you keep going down the list. Dante Manning, that's been a whiff from the 5-star expectations he had. Like, he's been, a capable player, but is he, an all-conference court? Like, if Dante Manning had lived up to the billing he had as a high school recruit, he wouldn't still be at Oregon. He'd be in the NFL by now. But again, there is no school in college football that hits on every single big-time 5-star recruit. Troy Franklin, that went pretty well. Mateo Uiagalelei, Mateo, by the way, 20th highest ranked Oregon recruit of all time. Elijah Rushing is just behind him a little bit, but I'm not really sure. Oregon just had the most players drafted ever for an Oregon Ducks draft class. What exactly am I missing there? But I do think the reason I really wanted to bring it up is not to go in depth on that particular notion or question, because I think it's just completely and utterly ridiculous. Like, Oregon puts players in the NFL every single year. They have had a long running streak that did not come to an end this past year. I think it's 5 straight years with a first round NFL draft pick, because Herbert was taken 2020. When would Penei Sewell have been drafted? Was that might have been in the same draft? Thibodeau was taken in 2020. That would have been the 22 draft. And I don't know, but if you look at the last 10 years, Oregon doesn't have a shortage of early round and mid round NFL draft picks. Like, I've never once felt that the Oregon coaching staff, or that this staff in particular, when you look at the draft classes that they have produced, I mean, they got guys drafted who I didn't think were going to, right? Guys like Jordan Riley to the Giants, or Jamal Hill got drafted. Didn't necessarily see that one coming. DJ Johnson got drafted in the 23 draft class, a lot higher than I think most people were expecting. He was like a 3rd round pick. He was like a 3rd or 4th round pick to the Panthers, I believe it was. So I think it's just one of those arguments that Husky fans like to make on Twitter sometimes to rile up Duck fans. And I don't, anytime I see these debates flying around, there's very little data actually getting thrown around. Like, what does Oregon do with their blue chip prospects and how they turn them into NFL recruits compared to X, Y, and Z school that recruits at a similar level? Like, I haven't seen that. And the evidence I see from Dan Lanning and the staff, their recruiting is really, really good. Their development is really good, and their production is really good. And those are the 3 areas that, I think it's important to evaluate Dan Lanning himself, but also his position coaches. How do you acquire talent from the high school and the portal ranks? what's the production like on the field at that position group? And what's the development like? Are guys getting better? So take Junior Adams, for instance, right? He's a stellar example. He is recruiting the wide receiver position better than Oregon ever has in the history of Oregon football. Is he developing those guys? Well, he arrived in 2022, and Troy Franklin that year had an 800-yard season. The following year, Troy Franklin had, checks notes, the best individual receiving season statistically in Oregon football history. That's not bad. Tez Johnson came over from Troy, where he was playing in the group of 5 ranks, up 1,000-yard season, preseason All-American on a couple of lists, preseason All-Big Ten, and had a 1,000-yard season last year, and should do so once again this year. So you kind of go down the list and say, I see recruiting, I see development, I see production across the board. So I think anyone who says that is just trying to get a rise out of some people, and I think Oregon staff on the whole does a very good job. I thought Carlos Lachlan did a good job. I think Rashad Samples is also doing a really good job of bringing in high-level talent. We'll see how he develops those guys. We'll see what the production is like. You know, Noah Whittington, Jordan James, those were Carlos Lachlan recruits originally, but Rashad Samples is still going to have his fingerprints on, you know, the way they play this year, or a guy like Jay Harris, for instance, because he's been, you know, his primary coach. I know Lachlan recruited him to Oregon, but how he plays on the field, yeah, he got some coaching from Coach Locke before he left, but primarily it's going to be how Rashad Samples coaches him and what that means for his productivity on the field. So. I don't. That's just go back to the original question. If you encounter that, well, Oregon recruits guys and doesn't produce them. Like, what does that mean? Like, what data? What comparison? What reference point are you going to? Because I look across at a variety of position groups, and I love the way Oregon's recruiting, and I think they are developing guys to make them better players than when they originally arrived, and that's translating to a lot of NFL draft selections. That's going to be the case, by the way, once again this year. So, yeah. Those be my thoughts. Thanks for making this your first listen. Go make Locked On College Football your second. I've got you covered with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.